Welcome, everybody. So good to be here with you. I'm just really excited because this morning I realized I've been sort of like a spring for the past 2 weeks. I've been just ruminating and really reflecting on all that has transpired over the past 6 months. And, there are periods in my life where I feel quite compelled to jump online, do a live stream, and just pretty much say whatever's on the top of my mind and heart. And I think that I've learned in this window, it's really important to be as intentional as possible. So what I did today is something I used to do actually before GreenMedInfo. I used to do presentations locally here in Florida at a health food store, actually called For Goodness Sake. And I would spend the day researching, taking notes, getting myself wound up. And I'd often have pages of notes like I have today. And often I won't even look at them because it's so hard to communicate all that's really swirling around inside of me. That said, I have been working on an article here for the past, it's been a month. And I decided that instead of spending all my time writing, which is something that I have spent a lot of time doing in my life, I'm realizing that it may be of greater service and value for me to just share what I have been working on. So the tentative title of this live stream is Biopolitics, the Corona World Order, and the Human Connection Movement, because those three themes have been such a central part of my life, and I can imagine your life as well. Given that we're all in this situation together, and many of you who are joining us, I know have actually been in my process, if you will, over the past 6 months and longer here in Miami, one of the locations in Florida and of course the United States that experienced quite a draconian response to the coronavirus pandemic, as they're calling it. One of the challenges for me is I feel like I have to qualify almost everything I say when it comes to COVID because of the always present danger of reification. That is, making something which is fundamentally not based on fact or actual experience seem as if real. That's what I mean by reification. And this is a rabbit hole that many of you, I'm sure, and of course, I'll speak for myself and Kelly, my wife, have been jumping down for years, but it's really this event horizon, which I will call COVID 1984, sort of playfully, which has brought us deeper down that rabbit hole than ever before. And when I say that rabbit hole, I'm referring to germ theory. And so one of the things that I've done recently, of course, is explore with colleagues like Dr. Andrew Kaufman the fundamental illusions around whether or not COVID, for example, fulfills any of the Koch postulates, which arguably are essential for us to have any faith in the present narrative that is dominating the world. Okay, I sometimes liken it to the sort of the ring that rules the world, or the narrative that dominates all other narratives. And I've also spoken in the past about how scientism is the religion that devours all others. And it's been very interesting because as I've gone down the germ theory rabbit hole with many of you here who've been doing the same, it's been apparent to me that actually germ theory is a very effective political instrument and weapon. And historically, it fulfilled that function. And that's one of the reasons why I'm doing this live stream, because as I was spending all this time looking into the history of germ theory, unfortunately, I had to go back in time and visit the Third Reich, because Hitler himself described himself as the Robert Koch of politics, meaning he believed that the ultimate solution for the German people was the eradication of the Jew, which he described as vermin, as a parasite, as a cancer, as a virus, literally. And so as I explored this interesting and very tragic historical moment, I saw so many parallels with what's happening today that it really behooved me to do more and more research. So that's one of the things I do, right, is I go down these rabbit holes. I can spend weeks, months, years studying a topic. And unfortunately, that's not always a good use of my time because, as you probably know, even being online right now drains you on some level of your life force. And one of the things I want to do today is not get too stuck in the academics, although I have to say, I'm excited to share with you the work of an incredible academic by the name of Giorgio Agamben. And he is an Italian philosopher that has finally reflected back to me or echoed feelings, sentiments, thoughts, even language that I have had to access to describe what's happening right now in the world, right? With the sudden descent of this global spell-like narrative that effectively paralyzed the entire world under the auspices of health security for the world. This gentleman, Giorgio Agamben, has been writing about this and really going out on a limb in Italy and abroad because he's been attacked for his views related to what social distancing really is. You know, it's really confinement, a euphemism for confinement in what is essentially a prison, which the planet is now articulating everywhere. So a lot of the language and explanations he's arrived at overlap quite a lot with what I've myself been observing. And I think many of you on this live stream probably also feel the same about what's happening. So what I intend to do, hopefully, is to share context, because as I like to say, you know, a text without a context is a pretext. And if ever there was a pretext for rolling out a totalitarian state and one that is really basically global, COVID is that thing. And there's a real history behind it. So as I weave around the topic, I'm going to have to go back to, again, the weaponization of germ theory and the reality that it was used actually within the Nazi program as a means to identify, itself, meaning the Volks Körper, or the body politic of the German people, as pure. And of course, there was the need for an other, the Jew in this case, that needed to be eradicated. And these themes are operative now. And even before the descent of COVID-19, I was writing about, the anti-vaxxer sentiment and the way the media was describing those who didn't vaccinate as being basically vermin, disease carriers, and threats to others, and how this locked into the 10 well-trodden steps to genocide, step 4 being dehumanization. And that is fundamentally what is at the root of what we are experiencing. And ultimately, I hope to wrap this discussion up with discussion around what I would call, and some of my friends are calling, the human connection movement, which is really nothing more than what should have preexisted this present psychological warfare, which is essentially what's happening, is the belief that, of course, having a body is now like having a deadly weapon. Simply by existing, now you are defined as an enemy of anyone else around you, enemy of the state, perhaps, and that there's a conflation with the surveillance of bodies with, prevention of worst case outcomes when it comes to health. So, the metaphorics of medicine and the military have been merging here for quite some time. And one of the things that we know is that when it comes to the idea of biopolitics, there's a real history here behind that term. So why don't I just start by going right to the term itself, because I think it's important for us to understand what biopolitics means. Because as far as Giorgio's work, one of the things he says is only because politics in our age has been entirely transformed into biopolitics was it possible for politics to be constituted as totalitarian politics to a degree hitherto unknown. So what he's referring to is this term that fundamentally actually was coined by this Swedish political scientist, Rudolf Kjellin. And he, at the turn of the 20th century, started to use the term. And fundamentally, it's about understanding the way that political processes work through controlling bodies. And it was Foucault in the 70s that described biopolitics as denoting a style of government that regulates populations through what he called biopower, the application of social and political power to all areas of life, right? Not a single dimension of our life is now excluded. And this is what has been the fundamental shift from nation states, for example, identifying themselves through territory to now being identified with the population of bodies that it maintains, manages, oversees, has power over. So biopolitics is really a new phase of human history. And it is so all-consuming that, as you can see, when it comes to the geopolitical chessboard, infection is now identified as a legitimate reason for state sovereignties to be completely neutralized. So if there's an Ebola outbreak in the Congo, so the narrative goes, then the United Nations, the World Health Organization, private public sectors can all work together to basically invade that sovereign state under the auspices of, it's not unlike the Bush era doctrine of preemptive war, is that if I feel that someone can harm me simply by, say, having a body or not engaging in intervention that we believe might be essential, like disinfecting and vaccinating, etc., then that means they're a threat to us. So on the microcosm level, that could mean that I'm not wearing a mask and therefore I'm a threat to you. And then the state intermediates, right, has the monopoly on violence and says, well, actually, yeah, you have to wear a mask. And if you don't, we're going to fine you and maybe put you in prison. You know, and if you have a kid with you at the time, maybe I'll take your kid away. I mean, there's things about that situation which are so unconscionable, but all throughout the world, this has been accomplished under the auspices, right, of COVID. So biopower, biopolitics becomes a really important term and concept to comprehend truly what's happening. So the concept of preemptive war, or the state or states, you know, in a global sort of synchronization can go and preempt the rights of an individual state, or could be a city, it could be a state in the United States, or a nation. This is a way of creating a global totalitarian new governance structure. So that's why the play on words, right? The Corona world order, is that this is fundamentally the new biopolitics. And this is the way that war is being waged. It's 100% psychological warfare or asymmetrical warfare, what's going on. Because by defining your sort of role in society as being depending on you basically accepting, you know, these new standards for behavior, socioeconomic behavior, like basically preempting you from gathering, which should be a constitutionally protected right, or a religious right, you going to church. Basically, this was an international coup. Is that previously, according to Giorgio Agamben's analysis, you know, there were three fundamental dimensions of the Western world that have overlapped and worked together, sometimes fought, and that would be, you know, capitalism, and then that would be Christianity, okay, and then there would be science. And between the three, what's just happened is science has declared itself victor, is that it is fundamentally what is now ruling the world. And when we say science, we're not talking about actual methodological studying of empirical phenomena. We're talking about what is fundamentally, you know, an orthodox sort of, it's basically reifications of experiences that are now considered the ultimate truth, right? So scientism really is a way of talking about how one way of knowing or experiencing asserts itself as the only right way. And that implied in that is, of course, not only the apotheosis of the human ego, but then also a medical monotheism is implied as well. And of course, as we're talking in the geopolitical context, we have now a means and a way to take over the world, literally, under the pretense of saving the world. So that's a big part of what this presentation is attempting to sort of put back into the discussion around what's happening, because I've spent so much time focusing granularly on the stats around, for example, the completely overinflated death numbers, right? When the World Health Organization introduced their emergency ICD codes in March, basically stripping any criteria for proving anyone died from COVID in their death certification process. And I interviewed Joy Fritz, the former death clerk, just to further establish that there's absolutely no evidence-based criteria for coding someone dead from COVID. There never was from the beginning. So all the numbers are false, but we can spend so much time on that dimension and lose track of the overarching context. And that's why the work of Giorgio Agamben has been so mind-blowing to me, because he's done such an incredible job of discussing this. So while I have spent a good 4 or 5 months focusing on that piece, which is the trumped up numbers and the reality that the emperor doesn't have any clothes here, the case-demic, if you will, the scaling of confirmed cases in asymptomatic populations, while the death rates remain flatlined and never were valid to begin with. I mean, it's absolutely obscene what's happening. It just amazes me, the success of this operation as it continues to lurch onward. So I think what is required of us at this moment is backing up and really understanding the context here. So one thing that also may help is going back to Benjamin Rush. This was a quote attributed to him. He was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. He said, "Unless we put medical freedom into the Constitution, the time will come when medicine will organize itself into an undercover dictatorship." It's not undercover anymore, is it? To restrict the art of healing to one class of men and deny equal privileges to others. The Constitution of the Republic should make a special privilege for medical freedoms as well as religious freedom. It's a little late for that, as you can see. At this point, although it would be wonderful to get an act of Congress to put another amendment on the Constitution and protect medical freedom, I think what we're seeing fundamentally is a metastatizing globally of what is a new form of totalitarian control that is, hundreds of years in the making. So, we have seen individuals like Benjamin Rush point out the dangers. This was probably in the late 1700s, and yet still today, few understand that we don't actually have those protections, at least not in the Constitution. So basically, as I start to do my analysis of germ theory, and of course, looking at the fact that when it comes to the Koch postulates here, Dr. Andrew Kaufman's interview shows that none of them have been fulfilled. So COVID-19 as this deadly particle from Wuhan doesn't exist. It has not been isolated, and they did not fulfill the basic postulates required to state that it's capable of infecting humans, causing the so-called symptoms that they attribute to COVID-19 and their constant reification and catastrophizing of those numbers in the media to generate more fear, so people feel more inclined to give up all their rights, and again, shuttering their businesses, locking themselves down literally in their homes globally as the economy implodes and literally trillions of dollars of wealth are transferred to what are probably 0.001% of the world's population. This is all happening under the cover or on the back of the crisis. And so I think there's a number of people waking up. I mean, that's exciting. And I don't think we're going to see this end in the election. And that's a topic that has come up continually among my colleagues here is that there's a feeling of, oh, this is just politicized. And yeah, it's been politicized, mask wearing and, the stance on vaccination. However, the reality is that this is so beyond the political system. This is as permanent state a problem, as systemic, institutional, that you can get. And that I think what we need to start having is more discussions at a higher level about what's really at stake. And that's one of the things that's come up really for me, because I had a background as a philosophy major in my undergraduate studies at Rutgers. And, the question of what is freedom, what does it mean to be human? These are questions that are coming up really strongly for people, because when you take away the right of humans to congregate, to touch, are we being defined now as animals? Are we being stripped of basic, soulful, spiritual, civil, human, experiences without which we can't actually define ourselves as human? So the implication here is that we have reached a stage where, interestingly, for those who don't know this, Nazism literally is a synonym for National Socialism. And National Socialism was sort of an aberrant expression of Marxist philosophy, which was an international concept, that there would be some transformation of, societies into eventually from capitalistic to what was essentially, I think, a pretty utopian view, right? I mean, obviously it didn't express itself other than horrific, genocidal practices throughout the world. But the reality is that, this gentleman was trying to envision potentially a better way. I'm talking about Karl Marx. I actually read Das Kapital in college, and there was a lot to it that was interesting. So what, is often discussed as socialism, communism isn't really necessarily true to the complexities, nuances of the literature. But I will tell you that the reality is that National Socialism is based on this organismic viewpoint that the independent, members of the quasi-organism of the state, the body politic, they have to live for the greater good. They only get their humanity by participating in this meta-organism. And so their individual liberties, right, their ability to say, hey, don't penetrate me with that potentially deadly medical intervention or whatever else you decide I must have for the greater good, could be a quantum dot, RFID-based chipping system, which is something that's now being discussed openly by the likes of Gates and his cronies. So this is where the rubber meets the road, because we're in a point in time where we have to start asking ourselves these basic questions and start understanding the context. So in that organismic view, there's a real shadow and dark side, because on one level, it's beautiful, right? It's true. We are participants in a body politic. And later on, as I end this, hopefully on a positive note, I'll be talking about interbeing, which is a concept that Thich Nhat Hanh sometimes referred to. A colleague of mine, James Maskell, also, I think, quoted him saying, community is the guru of the future. It's all related to this view. And I studied Merleau-Ponty's work, who was a very interesting French existentialist and phenomenologist. I almost went straight to graduate school because I wanted to be a professor, just focused on his work. But one of the reasons I found it so fascinating was he helped people understand that technically we are in a position where we have this intercorporality, meaning I can't truly even perceive myself without the help of the other in the natural world, that is. So for example, when you look at someone, if I'm not looking at the screen, I literally have a cyclopean gaze, right? It's as if someone punched a hole in this part of my face and the universe is streaming in, right? The visible world. This is how we're set up. But the moment I face my partner, she reflects to me, or he reflects to me, who I am, like through their emotional reactions. That's the humanity is in that circuit. That's why Botox was found to cause a dehumanizing effect, literally affecting empathy, is because you don't have that constant feedback, which is hardwired into our being. But just phenomenologically, being a human means you're being mirrored constantly by others. Mimesis is constantly built into what it means to be human. So when someone is afraid that you might have a germ, or for example, I'm not that person, but if I'm walking in the world and I'm suddenly anticipating someone's afraid to touch me, or because I don't have a mask, I have empathy and I understand, wow, they're afraid of me because they think I carry germs. So I comport myself differently. So I participate in the psyop just because I happen to be compassionate about it. You know what I mean? Like, so we're all in this web together. And that definition is actually what gets co-opted in these political structures, where in the organismic National Socialist view, for example, which hates parliamentary politics, the division of powers, right? Legislative and judicial and executive, they want full totalitarian despotic power, and they hate, the democratic, individual liberty concept. Well, that's what's going on. That's what's embedded within the vaccine agenda, is that for the greater good, you sacrifice maybe a few thousand people a year. That's why you have the National Vaccine Injury Act, so that you can pay out the $4.2 billion that's already been given to the dead children and irreparably harmed children from vaccines, because the vaccines are so dangerous that the damages need to be underwritten by the government, indemnified against damages. So the point being that, we are in a situation where, in the view of what's going on, okay, this global health emergency, everything is stopped and changed and modified forever after, right? Social distancing is a new way of life, the new normal. That view is absolutely a redefinition of what it means to be a species. When I say that, I don't mean it in the sense of just a strictly biological definition, because I say that all the time about the discovery of the microbiome, right? Is that technically our species definition from a microbiome perspective is that we're more bacterial, fungal, viral than we are human eukaryotic cells. So that's one way of looking at it. But the other side of it is, what I'm saying is, when we social distance, when we are required to think of ourselves as objects that can harm other objects. Okay, so what I'm talking about is what self-consciousness is in this psyop is a self-objectification and an other objectification simultaneously. This is what Martin Buber, the great theologian, called the I-it gaze. He remarked that when his cat looked at him, he received the I-thou gaze, right? Which is rarely present between humans these days. Which is that when you are reflected to the other from the other as a divine mystery, because that's what we are. Try eye gazing with someone for 2 minutes and see if you can't stop from crying, right? That is when you touch your humanity, which is so beyond anything we even envision is attributed to humanness in this day and age. But so when we have altered our self-definition as a potential biological threat, and when we perceive the world through that lens, this is the destruction of our humanity. And it's what Giorgio Agamben talks about when he says we've gone through the Rubicon from humanity to barbarism, where even now with COVID-19, we're burning our loved ones without funerals, as occurred in ancient times. That's what this did. This is what they're doing, is that they needed to invoke the scariest possible thing to human beings, right? To render us into a strictly animal state, what is often called, in his great, 7-book series on Homo, Soccer, and the Sovereign, I think it's Sovereign Power. It's a series. It's called The Bare Life, meaning we are rendered Homo Soccer, which is not even worthy of being sacrificed. You could be killed. Like, there's a definition apparently in Roman times. You could be killed on the street by anyone. It was not even considered homicide. You're not even worthy of being sacrificed in a pagan ritual, because you're strictly animal now. You're less than animal in many ways, because you are now a vector of COVID. They've defined you as such, and that makes you no longer human. That is what this psychological operation is essentially about, and it's been architected. That's what people, I think, really need to understand, is that this has been architected as a means of controlling all the bodies on this planet. This is what it's about. And by the way, as this operation descended on the planet, I think some of you probably felt it too. I was like, this is incredible. It could have been a meteor strike. It could have been, conventional weapons war or nuclear holocaust that could have created the conditions for the entire world to basically transform into this next stage. They chose a means that was both ingenious and absolutely nefarious, because we're doing it to ourselves. So, and the whole point, hopefully, of this discussion is once we see the larger context to what's going on, we can choose to continue to connect with one another and with ourselves so that we can affirm, vivify all these concepts with our actions and experience so that we can assert that we are actually souls. And that is what is coming to the fore. And I think there's an ontological bifurcation, a fork in the road. And we're seeing by droves a lemming-like exodus of friends and family and colleagues and people we used to look up to as they jump off the cliff into a state that truly is no longer human, and that will continue to be intermediated with digital devices so that human contact or contact with self is mediated through the proxy of technology and ultimately algorithmically modified and or weaponized against us, so that there are no longer humans involved in actually determining what we do on this plane, because the algorithms are driving the economy and they're driving the disease modeling, which is what's going on right now, right? They come up with this abstract projection, they shut down the world, and then when they find out that it was about 100 times less severe, does anyone apologize or change? No, it's the new normal. The whole point was it was a new 9/11. This is exactly 9/11, only it's global. And whereas previously you could identify a certain melanin content or religious affiliation as being attributable to this devastating and human act, now, because we all have bodies, we are all terrorists, and we can be harmful to ourselves and others. We need to be surveilled, controlled, locked down, and taken out if we don't comply. That's basically implied by what's going on. Of course, you've heard this all before. It's not going to make anyone feel great inside, but I think we know that's what's kind of happening. So hopefully I'll have actually some solutions. So just so we can kind of get Giorgio's analysis, I'll just go into just a little bit here. This is one of the phrases that came up here. Let's see. Okay. Well, yeah, see, that's the thing. I take notes and I just, when I go into the notes, I get overwhelmed. It's really something, because there's so much that I want to say. Let's just say this. When Hitler described himself as the Robert Koch of Germany, what he was affirming was my hypothesis, which is that germ theory has been completely weaponized. It has absolutely no basis in evidence. The concept, and I'll say it again, of an infinitesimal particle defined by the high gravitas sources of science as not being living, that has no inner motive power to go from point A to point B, whose very structure in its virion architecture depends on extraction of the host proteome and lipome. So it's not even separate from us. For that to take down a human being, again, this is electron microscope resolution. We're almost at a subatomic quantum level to try to even identify this thing we're saying is capable of killing a human being and taking over the world. Take out a cell membrane that has a tensile strength of steel. Do you see the absurdity of germ theory? I've been spending weeks and weeks going back into the literature. This is a really amazing book, The Rise of Causal Concepts of Disease. It's written by a philosopher, actually. When you go down this rabbit hole and you realize how absurd it is, this whole narrative is based on absolutely not even pseudoscience, then we start to really grasp just the power, the sorcery the pharmacia, which is literally a Greek word that means sorcery, that pharmaceutical comes from, that has captured the world. And I'm aghast in awe at the absolute lack of any semblance, any modicum of evidence to substantiate the dominant narrative. And I know you will find the same thing if you're looking for that kind of answer to what's going on right now. So what I'm most concerned about is the reason why Hitler used virology, classical concepts of immunology, and then also, by the way, why the Nuremberg trials, one of the primary revelations was the Nazis were experimenting on Jews with vaccines. Like, that was what they were trying to develop. Absolute inhumane experiments. And that after the Nuremberg trial theater was done, the majority of the criminals that experimented on these individuals were sent to the United States and or put back into positions of power in Germany so that they could carry on the very same way of thinking, the same devious attempt to create a vaccine agenda that was 100% intended to cause a biopolitical compliance with this new totalitarian state, where again, you are defined as an almost less than animal body. It's only through your participation in those rituals, which is what they are. And some of them involve the sacrifice of actual infants. That's actually true, right? The diploid cell lines require a continual harvesting of living fetuses in order to supply them. So this is actual child sacrifice level agenda operative. It's so dark. And yet, if ever there was a time, I mean, think about how many of us have gotten trolled just for pointing out that there is something called child trafficking on the planet, that there is something called organ harvesting, like the Falun Gong in China, whose bodies have literally been used as just meat, just harvesting their organs, often without anesthetic. I mean, this is what is running the world. It's the dark undercurrent that was revealed in this moment. Many of us who'd already seen this were living in this world already, afraid for our children, afraid for our own selves and for the ones we love. And now this is revealed as the etymology apocalypse, so poetically expresses, right? Sort of a unveiling what's already been there. So, it's the end of our naivete, childhood's end, if you will, or it's a entrenchment in that process of weaponizing our wounds and identifying with the aggressor and hoping the government or Trump or someone is going to save us from a system that is not human. It's not human. Humans might have created it at one point, but it's certainly not human. We have to assert our humanity by no longer consenting to these tactics, technologies, the best we can, because that is how we resist. So let me go back here. Okay, so as I got deeper into this topic, it was fascinating because it turns out that the Robert Koch Institute was complicit in violent Nazi practices, specifically focusing on their experimentation on Jews with vaccines. And they are the CDC equivalent. They are literally the CDC of Germany. And this only came out in the past decade, that they had carried on the Nazi tradition. To this day, this is what is operative within the vaccine agenda. So this is what is at stake. If you think about the greater good mean, the concept that we have to comply in order for the whole to be safe. If we don't get 95% vaccine compliance, we're all going to die, right? That goes so counter to what herd immunity even means. Even if we subscribe to this view, which has naturalistic origins, which is in the setting of a species, let's say deer in the wild, and it appears that they go through a epidemic, what happens is the next time something similar comes around, those who had what looked like infection were immune to it. So that was based on natural observation and the bodies of animals naturally doing what they do. But the vaccine agenda came in and said, we're going to replace natural immunity with basically injecting filth into the human body, creating little disease, less harmful than the actual disease, saving you, even when you're healthy, right? We're injecting it into healthy individuals to save you from what could be way worse scenario. That's the basis of the vaccine agenda and the push towards, quote, herd immunity, which is absurd. That's why they have boosters. It's because it never confers lifelong immunity or lasting immunity. That's the whole point why measles is coming back, right? Because they've injected MMR into them, which has actual live measles virus. The whole thing is absurd. The very thing that they're saying protects you is injecting you with the disease. And that's, again, part of the psyop here. So the idea of a greater good serves the political aspirations of fascist, totalitarian, despotic political systems. And that is why the vaccine agenda rolling out is going to ultimately lead to the same outcome, which is individuals or those who have children who have not vaccinated will be persecuted. And as you've seen in this window with COVID, and Mike Ryan, right, the director of the emergency programming at the World Health Organization, said they will go into people's homes and take out the individuals who have fevers, that they are saying they have that right to penetrate your child, penetrate your home under the auspices of saving you from an infection, which doesn't even have a mortality rate associated with it, because they never proved a single one of those that have been officially reported dead from COVID as having a virus in them that caused it, because they stripped the requirement to do virus testing in order to certify people dead from COVID. Do you see what happened? So the point is that this is a full frontal assault on individual rights, parental rights, families' rights, the constitutional rights you may have, under the auspices of the worst case scenario. And this is what Giorgio Agamben has been discussing, which is we have entered a new world order, which is one where biosecurity preempts everything else. It's all about preparedness. It's not preventing, right? They used to talk about disease prevention. It's preparedness. What that means is we are preparing for the worst case scenario, the highest impact scenario you could envision, the least probability of happening. That part doesn't matter, right? It's like terrorist attacks. The moment those guys with the box cutters took down those planes and the towers fell at free fall speeds to the highest resistance direction, because jet fuel apparently has this ability to burn steel and evaporate it into thin air. Ever since they did that, right, we were preparing for terrorist attacks for 20 years, right? That's what, and we went and fought a few illegal wars throughout the world and destabilized entire regions, and millions of civilians actually died. Some of this was confirmed by Lancet early. This all happened, people. We've been part of this under the good name of the United States and its citizenry. All this was fought for us, right? It wasn't really like that. There's a lot to the story that some of you know, but this is what COVID-19 is. It's the same thing. They don't even have a box cutter to show you. There is no towers falling, right? There are no dead bodies because they took the requirement for proving anyone died from COVID out of the ICD codes in March. I can't stop telling people that, because unless they understand that, they won't realize that this is a psychological operation. This is warfare on your mind and soul, because there's no evidence backing this narrative up. So when Giorgio Agamben explains that what have we done is we've ushered in the new surveillance state, the new technocratic global governance structure that preempts every single individual rights and nation's rights on the planet. It's just happened, guys. This is what's going on, right? So here we are. This is the new Corona world order, and we're going to have to learn how to navigate it. And now it's not going to be some kind of just organized march to this, end state. It's going to be messy, and there's a lot of free will involved still here. I mean, you've seen what's happened. Just what social media accomplished alone in the past 6 months is mind-blowing. When you see a single meme on someone's page on Instagram getting something like 40,000 shares when the World Health Organization's Instagram page can't get 1,000 likes. Can you imagine the trillions of messages that went out there to spread the truth about what's happening? That they can't control that seemingly. They've tried, they deleted the GreenMedInfo Instagram account, and there's a lot of concerning stuff happening that even Giorgio mentions. I'm going to quote it. It's very interesting that he's on this wavelength, because censorship, guys, and burning of books is actually a well-trodden step towards genocide. When they start burning books, it ends in burning bodies. That's one of the famous quotes from, the World War II. So I just want to throw a couple quotes out here, and then I'll move to hopefully the uplifting part of this conversation. So the epidemic, this is Giorgio Agamben. The epidemic, as the etymology of the term suggests, I love etymology. It's so revealing, okay? Because it always tells you the truth when you go deep into it. Demos is in the Greek, the people as a political body, and polemos epidemios in Homer, the name of the civil war. So even within epidemic, you have this concept of a civil war occurring, and the divisiveness we've seen. It's all about causing fragmentation, fractioning, causing you to involute, to self-isolate, to think that you're alone, to feel it, because that is how they rule with absolute power, is through having individuals fragment out. Ageism, classism, sexism, political affiliation, religion. There's so many ways that you can cut someone down, and that's what this is about. Okay, so the epidemic is, first of all, a political concept, which is preparing to become the new terrain of world politics, or non-politics, he says. Meaning we're so beyond, like we went through an event horizon, folks. We might as well be in outer space right now. That's how significant an epochal shift has occurred. And for those who are into the whole spiritual, perspective, that's amazing you chose to incarnate with me here now, because you could not have come up with a more profound time, especially to challenge yourself, to do shadow work, to grow as a human, to expand your spirit, to help others. You know how many people are going to need help now? I mean, it's amazing what's happened. Genocidal impacts economically alone are just so massive. We can't even conceive of it. Those of us who have the trappings of, bourgeois luxuriating culture like we do here on our live stream. Indeed, it is possible that the epidemic we're experiencing is the realization of the world civil war, which, according to the most attentive political scientists, has taken the place of traditional world wars. This is not an accident. They could have also sent one of those electromagnetic weapons, right? And just decimated an entire country, or something of that nature. They could have weaponized the weather in a specific way. They chose this. I mean, relative to what could have happened, it's probably a lot less messy, a lot less traumatic in ways. But I'm telling you, on some level, on a spiritual level, I mean, this is so beyond anything you could have dreamt of, even in the Harry Potter series, the nefariousness here. But it is the same, it's sorcery. All nations and peoples are now permanently at war with themselves, because the invisible and elusive enemy with which they are fighting is within us. So this is the point. And this is also why my book is actually very timely, because it was written to communicate to people the new biology, which completely, totally contradicts this worldview that is, again, based on a construct around what life is, right? What physics is operative, what is more valid, a vector, right? The movement of atoms or your free will in your body. These concepts have deep implications, political theory and civil liberties. But the point I'm trying to make is that they constructed germ theory as a weapon politically. And that is what it's being wielded for right now. Every time you hear Trump or any politician or anyone from the government, anyone in the media reify germs or COVID as something real that took down the economy or did this and that, you are participating in what I would call witchcraft. I mean, literally, if you can not see it for what it is, you are being captured by it. So we have, thankfully, now 20 years since, the turn of the 21st century of research that's showing that our body is radically resilient. And without microbes and viruses and fungi and germs, we would be dead in a microsecond. That is the reality, that we are microbial through and through, and that we cannot blame invisible particles on what's happening around us, that the politicians, those in the pharmaceutical sector, the finance sector, everywhere, the military, everyone is using this as an opportunity to roll out an agenda that does confirm exactly what Orwell said, which is that if you want a vision of the future, just visualize a human face being stomped at by a boot forever. Like, that's literally what he foresaw. And that is what is going on right now. It's super scary, guys. I mean, we already have enough trauma before this happened, accumulated in our bodies. But this is also, in a way, a release of that trauma, because I've been thinking a lot about it. I always knew that my generation, until obviously the Gulf War, hadn't experienced a war, but my mother did, and her parents did, and her grandparents. We have so much trauma in us. And what they've done, and this has been engineered, Rockefeller Foundation, all these different organizations, is to capture us, to install fear and programs in us that release into this dark future that they've architected for us. It's all been laid out. They're all trying to utilize our traumas, our fear, our anger, capture us, and just stuff it into a box. That's what this is about. This is why we live in a day and age where if you're not doing spiritual work, and I don't mean that in a bypassy or critical way, but if you're not realizing how your own traumas in shadow are often running the show, then you are contributing to the furtherance of this agenda. We all are. So ultimately, we can't even really blame them. We have to take full responsibility. Even now, you see how pissed off and excited I get about this. I'm in ways adding to it. Look at Alex Jones. Look at the people out there that are just adding hysteria and intensity to this topic, when in fact, that's probably not what most of us need. But I just get excited by having a colleague, finally, this guy, Giorgio, who ultimately speaks my language and helps us to understand really what is at stake at this moment. In fact, one of the quotes I sent earlier is, it seems that once terrorism has been exhausted as the cause of exceptional measures, the invention of an epidemic can offer the ideal pretext for extending them beyond all limits. So this is what he calls the exceptional measures, which is times of national emergency, every protection you had is completely gone. So they need to establish that COVID and all the future iterations that they've already figured out on their drawing board is going to continue to justify basically never letting you go back to normal, never letting your children walk in a world where it's normal for them to just make eye contact and breathe and feel human. This is what they have set up. It is that dark. And yes, some of us are in regions where we can barely feel it. Like, Florida, phase 3, open back up. They could lock it down any time they want. And the point is even if we're experiencing it here, our children, our loved ones have to interact with the rest of the world. And this is going to continue to spin out. There will be repercussions unless we can remove our consent, our complicity. So there's a ton more that I really wanted to communicate, but some of this stuff is kind of dark anyway. So let's just say that the article I was working on was called COVID 1984, the weaponization of germ theory and the ideological roots of medical fascism and Nazism. I mean, I was not looking to create this article. It emerged because the historical facts led me here. I mean, this is really unfortunate, but it's where we are. So the third part of the talk, though, is at least uplifting. So let me just have a sip of tea here, which is that I personally, and Kelly personally in this window, have felt a huge relief, because we are seeing around us, and we've been in Miami. So this is where, it was really bad. I mean, really bad. Still is to a degree. But DeSantis 2 days ago lifted the restrictions, and there's no longer enforcement of masks or social distancing with fines. All businesses can go back and open up, the ones who are still alive. So, it's been challenging because there was a moment where I wasn't sure what they were going to do. Yeah, because Event 201, which most of you know about, look it up if you don't. One of the simulations, which of course was this COVID-19 pandemic, they literally told everyone in New York City, October 2019, that they were going to do this. I mean, this is apparently how they operate. It's really twisted, but I guess we can thank them in some way, because they're telling us what they intend to do is to shut the internet down, to literally shut down the internet, to send a signal of who's in control. They may still try it. We'll see. But it could have gone there. It could have gone even darker. I was looking at some of the social media posts in Australia, and people were being taken from their homes for posting, pro-rally content on Facebook. So it's brought up a lot of anxieties that folks like us have who may be targeted. And, thankfully, a lot of people have spoken up. Initially, that wasn't the case. And it's not unlike my former experience of being one of the few people early on speaking out against Monsanto and, of course, pharma. And now there's a lot of folks who are doing it. So it feels better to know that we're not alone, right? That's part of the theme. So we had inspiration around basically just being human and connecting again, because that is fundamentally what this window's opportunity is all about. And it's also how we save ourselves in the world, is by showing up as human as possible and rediscovering what that means. So for me, and for some of you here, I imagine that means, first of all, trying your best not to live in fear, because I think that is the currency of this operation, is that to the degree that we're afraid or bury it and don't feel anything, they've accomplished their goal, so that they can roll out the agendas that, unfortunately, like I said, don't really even have human roots or endpoints any longer. There will not be an opportunity to reason or experience sympathy from a DARPA robot, and that used to be conspiracy theory 6 months ago. And now literally it's being, bandied about in the open as the future of enforcement of certain COVID related policies. So that, so what we are hoping to do is reconnect to the basic awareness we all have of, our inner strength to love and to choose to not be afraid and to do what's right. And that's what I think that the human connection movement is all about. 6 months ago, that would have sounded silly to me, the human connection movement. But I will tell you, like last night, for example, I was at an event here in Miami. And one of the practices you do is you just eye gaze. By the way, Kelly and I have implemented this in our relationship, and it's amazing because, like any human relationship, there's times where we frustrate each other, we feel disconnected. We might have stories in our mind about, why we feel like victims or whatever. And all it takes, literally, is just looking each other in the eye. And before you know it, it all melts away. And you just are in the presence of another being. And that is the root of our humanity. I believe anyone who stretches to open themselves to others will have this experience. And what it does is it brings up a lot of insecurities, a lot of fears, anxieties you might not realize you had, a lot of doubts you might have about yourself, all the way to the other end of the spectrum where you can feel as if you are in front of or are experiencing yourself as a divine being. And that shouldn't be heretical. In my world, that is a beautiful aspirational thing, that we all have a divine birthright and that we are fundamentally of God, a piece of God. Even our enemies are in many ways participating in that drama and dance. And so, what we're doing is we are facilitating the Thank You Body rally. And I'm so excited to let you know this. I've been wanting to make the announcement, is that within 3 days, we had 100 ambassadors step up who want to organize their own events throughout the world, like all 7 continents. And what was funny about it was when we had this idea, and it was really through Kelly primarily, because, she's used to being a dialectical activist, if you will, right? Like where we're, angry, and we're also, what are we doing? We're asking, we're protesting, we're, it's like an entitlement thing where the government, we want them to give us our power back, like, thank you, daddy, for giving me my power back that I deserve. Like, is that really how we need to show up? Well, so we started to feel that the way to assert, our humanity is just to show up and celebrate our bodies and stories around what we have healed in our own lives. So Kelly healed Hashimoto's after giving birth. She developed Hashimoto's, told it was a condition that couldn't be cured and had to be on meds for the rest of her life. Some end up losing their thyroid. And she cured it because she happened to have met a naturopath who guided her through the process of letting her body take care of itself. And I went through a process of healing asthma, as I document in Regenerate. And there's so many people out there who, in simply existing as whole, who've healed, are doing some of the most radically disruptive and revolutionary work on this planet simply by existing. And that is what you call the N of one, right? Meaning just one person, that's all it takes. Your experience is as valuable as every single published peer-reviewed study on the planet put together in a pile. Your experience of your own body and your faith and confidence in its ability to heal is as valuable, and I would argue probably more valuable than the total history of all scientific literature ever published. And I'm saying that as someone who spent over a decade in front of a computer gathering all of this research together. So I don't say this lightly. The N of one, okay? What I'm saying is that we can connect energetically with our intention. And that sounds like New Age bypassy BS, I know. But I do see this happening. This event was nothing more than Kelly and I really just having a vision for an event, really basic, where we show up and we celebrate that COVID is over. Because it is, literally. There's not a leg for them to stand on in terms of body counts or confirmed cases or all the pseudoscientific gobbledygook that they've been spouting this whole time. They don't have a leg to stand on. Just you being in your body, talking about how you scratched your knee and it healed is more revolutionary, more powerful than any of the psychobabble garbage that is being put out there through the trillions of media outlets. That's what this is about. That's what the human connection movement is all about, and the Thank You Body Rally. So I highly encourage you, especially the 446 people that are here live. I deeply honor you because you all have a story of how someone healed in your life, how you healed. And you showing up and sharing that, guess what that's going to do? You're going to feel your power. Not power over, you're going to feel what it means to trust and love and have access to your body, which is a divine instrument. It's even a bliss technology. Literally, that's what Dan Winters defines it as. And he even defines culture as a degree to which humans have figured out how to affirm and release the bliss that is within the body. That sounds like a cult statement, but what's the other alternative? The belief that your body is a bioweapon for simply existing and you have to wear a face diaper all day and inject yourself with vaccines that are going to kill you. That's their version. I'll take the I'm a bliss technology because that is the truth. And I'm telling you, you can experience it, because to the degree that you don't experience it is the amount of trauma that has been embedded into you over generations. Half the crap that you think is you, that is your fear and your limitation, is installed within you, probably because as a gelatinous infant soul or embryonic soul, you took it in from your parents because of their concretized traumas, and you're here just to transform it and let it go. I mean, this stuff is real. So and by the way, when you show up and you share your story, it could be through social media, but go to one of the 100+ events that will soon be announced on thankyoubodyrally.com, is that you are sharing your story. You are going to inspire others. It's not going to be about anti-mask or anti-vaccine. This is such a pro-positive movement that nothing can stop it. It precludes that childish layer of fighting, for something that you're already entitled to have. It's not co-optable. It's a dialectical, it's not going to get pulled into the dialectic, right? So by you showing up, you're not only giving to yourself and regaining that enthusiasm and that feeling of grandeur that is in you, but you're showing others, especially those who are younger, the children, the people that are looking up to those who have the experience and have the courage to just go ahead and say something and be something that's positive. So that is what the human connection movement is about. It's simply about connecting. And it starts with yourself. I mean, that's the beauty of it. Even if you're preparing to do your video or your statement, you just start feeling like, wow, okay, what am I thankful for? And like you start recording and you're like, wow, that didn't even feel really authentic. You kind of have to be it in order to convey it and access it. And that's the point. They can take me to a gulag, a FEMA camp, okay? They can do what they want to me, but I'm going to do my best to have an inner smile in my being, because I know I tried the hardest I could to show up for myself and others. And that is what this is about, is you're not defeatable. When you're in that space, you can declare victory. I can declare the pandemic over. You guys are affirming that. Listen, when my Instagram page got deleted, I put a video out there. It's like, guess what? The pandemic is over. And they shut down my account and they started to attack my YouTube because they don't want to hear the truth. They don't want people to say, oh, there's no such thing as a COVID virus that is going to kill you. But you simply being here, showing up, is going to have that effect. And it's so powerful. It's the Maharishi effect. If you want science, go to Rupert Sheldrake. Look at morphogenic fields. One monkey starts washing its potatoes with the salt water because it tastes better on this island. And then monkeys separated from that monkey start doing the same thing. You start trying to crystallize a chemical in a laboratory in Australia, and then over time in Japan and Germany, it becomes easier because there is a field that connects us, and that when you enter a state of bliss or joy or courage or anything like that feels good and true, that resonates throughout the world. And that is a real phenomena, and that we can access it. And I know for certain it's happening, because why would 100 other people do events just because we just put it out on the internet? Now everyone wants to do events. It's because everyone is ready for this. So that's what I encourage you to do, and encourage you to be aware of what we're really up against, and then even then choose to live the best life you can. 3 times today I went out and did something physical because I could get sucked into this computer. I was preparing for this, and I go into my mind, and it's like all this information, and I have to constantly try to stay in reality, because technology like this is amazing. It's connecting us. It's going to be part of how we liberate ourselves. But it's also got a dark side. So that is that for my spiel, but I'm going to check this document because my brother Jarrett is here. He is an amazing individual, and he has been taking a few questions. So I love questions. Is there research that past coronaviruses can make you test positive for COVID-19? Oh, wow. So this is it. This is how they've captured us, because it's a great question within the completely delusional structures they've created. So is there research that past coronaviruses, okay, so when we say past coronaviruses, what we would say is that there is no such thing. There is no such thing. There are viral particles which are secreted by cells within humans and animals and fungi and bacteria. Those things they call viruses. But since they cannot exist without taking proteins and lipids and carbohydrates from the host, they can't even really be called viruses separate. So in other words, it's like when someone says immunization, it's a semantic sleight of hand, because they're implying that vaccination can generate greater immunity, which is not true. That's just not true. In fact, quite the opposite. Vaccines harm the immune system. So when they say immunization, it makes you think, oh, okay, yeah, they must work. Same here. So when they say there's 100 strains of coronavirus, what they're talking about is cellular debris that overlap with exosomes and other extracellular vesicles, as well as apoptotic bodies which when a cell breaks down, it releases viral-like particles that contain nucleic acids, which overlap with what they call coronavirus, which includes RNA. So that part of the sentence alone, we could spend a good week talking about. And actually, Dr. Andrew Kaufman on questioningcovid.com has done that for us. He's an amazing researcher, extremely credentialed, a real scientist. He's gone into the literature. He's proven there is no such thing as COVID-19. There's no such thing as a viral particle that has been identified to cause infection. I know that sounds crazy, but join me here. Go with me down this rabbit hole. There is over 100 years of discussion on the topic of what causes disease. The etiological viewpoint, which has been a development of the mid-1800s, right around the time of the Industrial Revolution and the architecture around the Rockefeller Foundation co-option of science, basically. I mean, they gave birth to molecular biology. This was all a psyop. As germ theory is a theory, always was a theory, and has absolutely no basis in reality. How about that? Okay, so is there research that past coronaviruses can make you test positive for COVID-19? Well, the tests are absurd. They are absolutely absurd. And I know you've heard this before by now, because thankfully the research and the truth about PCR tests has gotten out. But what they're calling a COVID-19 test, it's like immunization. It doesn't test for COVID-19, so they shouldn't call it a COVID-19 test. They should call it a psychological operation, test. So I don't think I've answered your question, but I kind of know what you're saying. Is there research that past coronaviruses can make you test? Yes. So the point is that you have a virome. You have trillions of nucleic acids, some of which are found within envelopes, some not, which are part of the natural spectrum of biological phenomena that you can find within the body. But think about this. You can go down to the quantum level. I mean, you can go down so far in resolution that you lose hold of anything that even comes close to reifying this world we live in, right? Like macroscopic things seem like they're separate from each other. These waveforms look solid, but this is a field. And that's even just using metaphors from the macroscopic world, like a field. Like, in other words, the mystery is so vast that anyone who presumes to understand it, much less through the reductionistic lens of conventional science and medicine, is absolutely deluded. So this is what we mean by they've taken the world over. Medicalese and this whole realm of positivism and materialism, this concept that there are these things like viruses that exist, that live outside of us, that can harm us. It's like it's samsara. This is a great word for it. It's an illusion. It's truly, you have to almost access Eastern religion to try to describe what the West has done with these concepts. It's almost like fluoride. It's ideological fluoride. It's designed to make you so stupid that there's just no way you would ever know that you're stupid. Like, it's like that. Like, it's the fluoride problem is only a problem if you haven't been on sufficient quantities of fluoride and realize it's creating your stupidity. I'm sorry to say. So, do flu shots make you more susceptible to COVID? If so, where's the evidence? There was a study that was funded by the Department of Defense and the Pentagon, which we reported on among a number of other individuals, that discussed viral interference, which is when you give an influenza vaccine to the soldiers, the indication was coronavirus levels and what they called infection, because I don't believe infection. There's opportunistic growth, and there's also damage to cells, which then cause a release of viral-like particles, some of which are exosomes, which are misidentified as viruses. So when cells are not healthy, they give off nucleic acids. That's just a fact. In fact, even the Hopkins virologist, I watched this whole presentation on COVID-19 and exosomes, identified exosomal release from damaged cells as one of the reasons why you get the cytokine storm that causes morbidity in COVID-19 infection. He was inadvertently admitting that exosomes and coronavirus are indistinguishable. They're part of the same disease process, and you can't distinguish between them. They're infinitesimal as it is. Again, you need to go down to the subatomic level, which is where electrons live, to have an electron microscope to even see this thing, which you've already said isn't alive because it's a virus. The psyop is so ingrained in us to think that a viral particle that is on a subatomic level could just tackle you like a lion on the Serengeti tackles a gazelle. That is what they've convinced the public of. The majority of people that are wearing masks believe this story. This is a fairy tale. It's a fairy tale. There's no science to it. And if there is science to it, it's not science. It's a fairy tale. Okay. So the answer then is absolutely. Whenever you take a shot with anything that has an adjuvant, with anything that has biologicals in it, it is going to cause harm. That is okay. I can't say always, because there's some part of me that acknowledges that there are spiritual explanations, if you will, for almost anything that happens. And I can't say that I know better than the universe. And in some cases, maybe someone benefited from a vaccine. See, there you go. I can't say unilaterally that I know everything and therefore it's always bad, but I can tell you that it's likely that if you get a flu shot, you're going to get sick. And when they take a fake PCR test to identify nucleic acid sequences, not viruses, they're probably going to find more of those in your body than if you hadn't taken the shot. But in that Pentagon funded study did show 36% increase in coronavirus infection in those who received the flu shot. So yes, even though the author of the study had to write a sort of apology because of the politics around it. So any study that indicates, the sort of Achilles heel, chink in the armor tends to get retracted, or the author gets reprimanded. And science is politics, and it's scripture. It's really scripture. It's, modern peer-reviewed published research. It's industrial product, but it's also just scripture. So it's not supposed to be true at this point. I know I'm skeptical, cynical, but I do really feel that's probably generally true. Okay. Dr. Cowan's book. Could you please give that book title again? Dr. Cowan's book. Well, he just wrote a book called The Contagion Myth that was apparently pulled off Amazon with Sally Fallon. Those are two great colleagues of mine. And I would suggest taking a look, but yes, that's probably it. What are our solutions? That question is really good. And I'm thinking about that all the time. Trust me. What are our solutions? Because there's so many ways to answer that. Like, we could look at it from the financial, economic perspective. We could look at politically. We could look at spiritually. There's so many ways to answer that question, right? I mean, I'm having faith that, like I said, with the Thank You Body Rally and the Human Connection Movement, if you will, it is really going to be through our daily acts of attention, being awake, trying to not let our egos run the show, continue to do self-work. I think prayer, meditation is super powerful. I felt that. I feel that there's a lot of soul level work happening. I think it's time that the word soul be reintroduced into daily conversation, because the word mind, body, spirit just doesn't do it. The soul was exorcised, because it's literally what we're talking about by when you go and show up and you feel your story about healing. Like it's like what Joseph Campbell said. I love that quote about what people are looking for is not meaning, right? It's not like this existentialist angst of, I wish I understood what's going on. It's the feeling of being alive. That's what it is. Dancing, singing, talking to a friend, hugging, going and exercising, like eating good food together, planting, massaging, like whatever is a beautiful thing you can do. Like gardening, hanging out with a kid, a pet, not doing anything, sitting on your bed and eating ice cream. Hopefully it's gluten and dairy free. As long as it's serving you and you feel good, that actually is worth prioritizing. I know it sounds absurd from the perspective of global famine and all the other things we're talking about, but there's truth to that if we can hold a space of happiness and levity, even while being aware of what's unfolding, I think that is the true practice that we're being called to perform. And it's an invitation. I mean, that sounds great to me, because guess what? The gulag is forming. It's been forming, this transmogrification of the private, prison industry. We have just transmogrified the entire planet into a digital prison. Like literally, that's what it is. And so, yeah, welcome to the new world. So it's about trying to find ways to resist non-violently and in a way that's contagious. The fear is contagious, but there's something far more contagious that people just haven't had enough experience with. That's why we need to have pro festivals like my colleague Mark Cohen in Australia. He wasn't settling for the fear porn of people getting arrested in their homes. He's like, you know what? We're going to have a celebration, and that's our form of protest. Or as I said, in my announcement with Thank You Body Rally, being healthy is an incredible form of protest. And that is what we're here to do, is to be healthy, to re-engage community. I mean, someone tries putting a mask on me, for example, that can be the whole spectrum. I mean, I will do anything in my power to make sure that no one even thinks of doing that to me or my loved ones. So there's a certain fierceness that comes with this commitment as well. So I'm not saying be pushovers, but love is really strong and it's very fearless if it's really based on an appreciation for reality of what's happening. Okay, cool. Can you please send us links to pages on your website and others with compelling evidence about COVID, the COVID lie, to share with people? That's what Questioning COVID is all about. That resource was put together collaboratively. It's had over, I think, 500,000 views so far. So there's, at least it's doing something out there. But that website collates a lot of the research. Of course, GreenMedInfo, I do a lot there to try to keep information rolling on what's actually happening. Telegram is how I'm connecting in real time. I enjoy it. I feel like, okay, I mean, it's difficult because I want to be really positive, and then I also have to report on what I feel is happening. Like I want people to be aware. So please feel free to join us on Telegram. Thank You Body Rally, of course. Oh, of course, Stand for Health Freedom. How could I forget? Our 1-year anniversary just happened, and I'll be announcing that myself soon. But that is one amazing platform that you can use to take steps that are more than just signing a petition or clicking a mouse. It really does have an impact. I mean, we've seen it affect legislation in places like New Jersey in a way that even blew my mind, that there was such a groundswell of activity and support that was articulated through the platform that it really caused an unprecedented reversal of what was going to be the stripping of the religious and medical exemptions for vaccination in New Jersey. And of course that happened, and then COVID happened. So, go standforhealthfreedom.com and you'll see all the actions that we have put out there. And it wasn't easy at first. There was, I probably lost 20% of my newsletter subscribers, a lot of who sent a lot of hate mail just by standing up for what I thought was right. And now we've been vindicated because the numbers show that this is a egregious 9/11 style psychological operation, that COVID-19 is not based on an actual threat to our health in the way that they've said. Okay. I can't say I follow completely your criticism of germ theory, but does bacteria fall? Okay. This is a really good question. So yeah, I should have been more specific. The history of germ theory is fascinating because it comes from an ancient understanding of disease that was based on looking at the effects of things like environmental exposures and or inherited issues, like miasms is one way they would talk about it. So one of the ways of describing it was the filth theory of disease. It's like the fish tank concept, like in terrain theory, right? Is that you have a filthy fish tank, the fish gets sick. So you don't vaccinate the fish, you change the water, right? And you feed them well. That's all. It's that simple. It's not a lack of vaccines, and it's not a viral particle that you blame for the literally hundreds of thousands of insults the body goes through in probably a day because of EMF and the 100,000 plus novel petrochemically derived toxicants that we're exposed to in our environment, our foods. Like all of that. Let's say I'm a smoker. I was going to point this out. For 50 years, and I drink every day. And thank God I'm still ticking and I'm feeling good. And then suddenly I end up with pneumonia And I go to the hospital, and actually they don't have to test me for virus, but let's just say they did, and they give me a PCR test, and they're like, you have COVID-19. And guess what they do? They write down that COVID killed you. Where's the responsibility in any of that? Where's the natural law of cause and effect, which is another word for karma? Like, you chose to live a lifestyle, and hopefully it produced joyous experiences for you. But then to blame a viral particle on you dying, even if it precipitated a fever, which then contributed to you kicking the bucket, it doesn't mean that you can blame that viral particle for your death. And that is what they've done. They've done this from the beginning. Allopathy depends on you not looking at the obvious causes of diseases. Look at it that way, right? The Rockefeller Foundation, what did they make all their money with? Petrochemicals. In fact, they introduced petrochemical medicine into the equation. And then they created structures around that to make it seem as if it was a lack of their poisons that was killing you, and that actually nutrition, diet, lifestyle, mindset have nothing to do with morbidity or mortality. It's that thinking which has created COVID-1984 and taken over the world, because they can blame something outside of you, a boogeyman, a demon, an invisible enemy that will forever be mutating, evading, and the things that are killing us, like geoengineering, using aluminum and barium, and genetically modified food, and vaccination, and EMFs, all the things that the Gates Foundation are invested in, for example, all those things don't mean anything anymore, because it's the viral particle that we have to thank for everything that's wrong on this planet. And they just happen to have a way to test for it, and they're going to surveil you 24/7 to protect you from it. It's the perfect psychological operation if we consent to it. So I know you know the story, but it doesn't hurt to go over it again. So as far as I invite everyone to go deeper down the rabbit hole. Go to questioningcovid.com. You'll see a whole section. There's a second section on questioning germ theory. And it is a delight to be liberated from the illusion and the shackle hold, the shackles and the stranglehold that is upon us due to this operation. Because once you realize that viruses do not cause disease, and yes, there is a carve out for certain bacteria, but it's the same thing. It's like a forest floor. In order for regeneration to happen, the cells, the tissue that's damaged and sick, needs to be degenerated, needs to be decomposed. And what better to do that than the microbiome? So to blame diseased tissue, right? Some tissue's diseased, you get opportunistic infection. Maybe you throw in the substrate of diet, which maybe it's full of sugar, and you get an overgrowth of this or that pathogen. But to blame that on the part of the cycle that is required for regeneration is the whole basis of the PSYOP. Okay, can we set up funding to do the science that the mainstream will not do to really prove that viruses or bacteria cause disease? Yeah, I've sort of given up a bit on the funding thing with the science. I feel like, especially now, in a way, like, it's not a lack of information anymore. I mean, the internet's still here. It's been here throughout this whole thing. It's really not any longer. And I really feel like the direction is in living our lives fully. And instead of, asking for permission or waiting for the powers that be to validate us, to continue to do what you feel is right. It's a radical anarchistic concept, I know. Just to simply do what you feel is right without having to check in with external authorities or the biometric temperature reading equipment at your local gym or at your airport. But this is what the front line is, I think. It's really just not contributing to complying with, consenting to the operation any longer to the best of your ability, and make sure that you continue to make healthy decisions. I think that's the key. So anyway, thank you everyone for being part of this live stream. It's means a lot to me that you showed up, and I'm so excited because we are literally going to have a global event where we can all connect, celebrate at whatever level. I mean, again, when Kelly and I thought of this, we were going to just put a soapbox up here in Miami. 10 people came, great. And it turned out that the world's ready to just celebrate in this way and to assert our freedoms and just connect. So thank you. Please feel free to share that with others. And I'm so looking forward to learning more about your stories as well. So thank you again for being part of this.